Hello, welcome to today's presentation. Now, if you're just looking at vinyl flooring, you don't know much about it, you've heard it, you've heard luxury vinyl and all that kind of stuff. You might be looking at it and saying, well, I don't really know. There's just so much information out there. It has a bit of a learning curve. I had a friend of mine that just recently got transferred into the flooring department at a place where he worked. And when I went over to see what was in stock and all that kind of stuff, compare prices, yada, yada, he says, well, I don't really know that much about it. I just moved into this department. And I said, okay, well, let me give you a little quick rundown so you can help the customers, other customers after I go. And I did, and he seemed to appreciate it. So I think there may be some value in this. It's only going to take a few minutes of your time. It's free, and it's just what I've kind of picked up real quick. Certainly it's nothing that you can't find on your own, but maybe I just save you a little time on your learning curve. So let's get started. So all this conversation I'm going to give you should be taken as an in general type of conversation. I'm sure there's exceptions to every rule and that kind of thing, but we're going to start right at the beginning with what is a vinyl plank. And it is a long, skinny type of vinyl made material with normally grooves and some means to attach them together. Generally they are floating. There might be some glue down versions of this, but generally they're floating, at least in this product line that I look at. They differ from roll vinyl or sheet vinyl or a calendared vinyl because it doesn't come off a big 12-foot or 16-foot wide roll and then you just trim the edges around the room. That's it vinyl, but it differs in the fact that these are locked together planks. They also have some tiles that are more square-like and like you would think of. They're essentially individual pieces, but they're more squarish and shortish and tightish like than a board. Okay. Now, how this differs from hardwood is a natural part of a tree. It's been cut down and made board like with tongue and groove and connections, and they go in how they go in. But because it's a natural wood, a strength of that is that it's softer, it's a little flexible. Even hickory, true hickory is hard, but it's still a kind of a fairly soft material that can take dents if you hit it hard enough. So it's not hard like a tile, like a marble, a tile, or concrete. It's softer than that. But it's wood, so you can sand it down and refinish it later, change the colors if you want in the future. That's a strong part. The bad part with it is it's hygroscopic, so if you get it wet in places, it'll change dimension, it'll swell up, and it can cup and warp and give you a little bit of issues and sometimes joint problems. That's the weakness of it. Enter laminate floor. Well, laminate floor is a type of board like this. Normally they'll have a groove, tongue and groove type of some kind of interlocking type system. And it's made out of basically junk board on the back and a very thin laminate of the pretty board on the top with a finish, and it's stained and finished on top. The bad part about that is it's very thin, and if it gets scratched, there's very little you can do with it to improve it because you normally can get into that veneer below and scratch it. And you can't sand it down really and refinish it because it's not thick enough. Its strength is that it is an engineered product, and there's usually back on the backside, this is like a fiber board, wafer board, particle board. It's some type of scrap lumber material used to make like a plywoodish type. Some of it actually may even have plywood in it, but it's glued together with glues, and most glues we use with wood are formaldehyde based. And so we know that we had the company a couple of years, maybe a decade, I can't remember when it was in the past, got in real trouble because it was Chinese made product. The board was not very good, the fibers weren't very good, and apparently they had to use a lot of formaldehyde based glue, and that formaldehyde was leaching out into the environment, and people thought it was making them sick. So that's an issue, but it's good for basement or garage floors or someplace where you might have a lot of moisture because it's less moisture sensitive than real wood, but you can't sand it down and keep it. Now, vinyl is an engineered product. Most of it will have, that you'll probably run into, will have a cushion of some sort. This one is a kind of a blondish work. They give you a nice dark colored back. This one has got a white colored cushion to it. A little different. It's just a cushion. It's got a core of some sort that will allow for the shape to let it interlock together, and it'll have a top color layer, couple of layers for the color and texture and wear. So that's what that is. Now, what do we got next? Just kind of a loss leader flooring that they have at the store where I got this. It's a 12 millimeter thick on the 12 mil thick on the wear layer, and 6.5 millimeter thick on the board, the overall assembly. When I laid it out in the bathroom, it didn't take me too long to realize there's one particular very distinctive pattern. Because this is hickory, it very much shows up as it's the same board multiple times, even in the small places of that bathroom. It showed up real quick. It is more important to, in my mind, if you have a very high contrast in your plank printed design. It's less important as you go up in style and you have other planks. You may have the same board, but the more of them you have and the more uniform kind of they are, black and gray, the less likely you are really to pick up on the fact that that's actually a pattern over there. It's when it sticks out like a sore thumb, like this, where we had the kind of yellowish kind of color here, and then that dark hickory heartwood knot that they put in, it really shows up. It's more or less important depending on the color and style of design you have. Well, how good is your eye for detail? Let's take a look at some things right here. This is that pergo floor. And if we look right here, we see like a little round U and a little V and some saw cuts, some scrapes right through here. And we see this is at the beginning of a board. Remember, they're going to go in with all in the same direction with the males and females lining up a certain way. So right there we have that U and that V. Look right next to it. A U and that V. See that little white spot? Little white spot. And yet this is at the end of a board. This is at the start of a board. And if we step right back, we find the little U, the little V, and that kind of little white spot right there. And that is that same pattern almost on top of each other, but you don't really notice it unless I showed it to you, do you? All right, ain't that something? Now let's look at another little feature that repeated itself. I caught this up here just today. All right, notice that little black line here, and then this crack, these two little cracks. I call that a little feather. It looks like a little feather bloom right there. All right, look, and this is almost at the end of that joint. The piece immediately above it, look, there's that black piece, a little feather, a little line. This is in the middle of the board, or the plank. This is at the end of the plank. And it repeats. Look right over here at this one. Right there. There we have our little feather, our little line, and our two little cracks. Look right across from it. A little feather, the line, the two little cracks. Let's go down in here. I've got some more of it. All right. The line, the feather, two little cracks. In each one of the places, that particular printed item ends up in a different location. So these boards are not exactly alike. The pattern repeats, but it's on a different linear spacing than the actual plank length. And so I think it helps break it up even more. But because this is just basically black and white and shades of gray in between, it really doesn't show much in the pattern unless you're actually looking for it like we just did. Hey, appreciate you watching. Do me a favor, if you will, subscribe to the channel, either the YouTube or the Rumble channel, which this appears in. And if you can, check the notification bell or settings to make sure that you get notified when new videos are posted. Appreciate it. Widths. Okay, widths. You kind of have narrow board and you kind of have wide board. Well, what's the difference, Del? How wide it is? It's just width. Is there a benefit or weakness to having narrow board versus wide board? I don't know that there are. I tend to like the wider plank. Honestly, I kind of like the wider plank. It goes together faster, I think. I'm handling fewer planks themselves and and tightening up the joints. And I have fewer joints, for fewer linear inches of joints, because I have bigger areas per actual plank I pull out. Now here is the pergo, and I don't know if I can get it close enough. If you can see, there's some depth to the joint, and I have to work this backwards because I'm seeing my little face on the monitor in front of me. But see, it goes together and it locks in. And now, because this would be 9 inches wide and this is 9 inches wide, I only have a seam every 9 inches. Okay, so that's fewer places for it to potentially leak, whether or not it's waterproof, says it's waterproof or not. So the narrower the piece is, the more of those joints I'm going to have in between each plank. And I have to handle more planks. So I don't know, there's a lot of difference between that. There is something they call the mixed width. Some will call it random, but it's really not random. It has to be mixed because they're made in specific rows. So you'll have like a 3-inch, 5-inch, 7-inch, or 5, 7, 9, whatever it is. They'll have like 3 different widths or 4 different widths per pattern in this particular style you might purchase. And what you end up having to do is, have to get like 4 or 5 boxes and rip them open and then count the number of skinny pieces, medium pieces, wide pieces, or super wide pieces, stack them up. And then you can then lay them out, and you lay one row of one size, and you come back and lay the other side and the third side or fourth size in there, and you stagger your joints. So that gives it a little bit of randomness, and then you can kind of randomize the pattern of like 3, 5, 7, 3, 7, 5, 3, 5, and then when they butt up next to each other, you might have 2 3s together or 2 5s or whatever it is, but they change in length and change in whatever. You just want to make sure that you don't pick on a bunch of 3-inch rows together, else you'll run out of them. And you'll have then all 5s or 7s concentrated somewhere else. It's a little more effort to do that. I just didn't want to. There are actually some printed patterns that look like it has multiple pieces in it. Obviously it's not, it's just a printed picture on there, but you can actually have a wide plank that looks like a lot of little planks put together, and some people might like that. And the only time you really see the difference is if you're looking down a hallway or something and the light hits it, the joints tend to show up a little bit that way. So that's your plank width. It's a choice. It's just whatever you like. I think the wider plank goes in a little faster, a little easier. Thickness. Okay, what do we got next? We got the thickness of this stuff. Okay, here's a piece, all right, and you can see it definitely has that the cushion on the bottom, and you can see that dark layer on the top, and it's actually a lighter color on the very, very top. And we see we get an idea. We can see that the shape of that little tongue. Okay, the thickness. Some of these maybe as far down as 3.5 mil thick, which is really thin. 3, 4.5, 5. 5s are pretty common. 6 and 6.5 are another common. This is 6.5 thick. The assembly is 6.5 millimeters thick. This one happens to be 6 even thick. The more thick it is, generally, the more rigid it'll tend to be. And I think in general, you might find out it's more forgiving over a rough subfloor if it's a little thicker piece. The old sheet vinyl, the roll vinyl stuff, was not very forgiving. If you had like 2 pieces of your subfloor and you had a little edge up on one was a little higher than the other, it would kind of show that line where they came together. The vinyl plank is a little better about that, about hiding those imperfections. And each series, check with your manufacturer to see what's that maximum flaw that your subfloor can have before it will show through on your vinyl plank. Roll stuff shows up a lot easier than, because it's not as thick and it doesn't have this solid core to strengthen it. So the thickness goes into that. It makes it a little stronger, may give you a rougher floor coverage, but it also gives you these joints. It makes these joints maybe more or less fragile, because if you read on your flooring when you compare manufacturers and colors and whatever, don't just look at the color, look at whether or not the edges are subject to a lot of breakage complaints. It could just be they had a bad batch, could be that people didn't know what they're doing, or it could actually be that it's pretty fragile. Common sense tells you that if I cut this piece thinner and thinner and thinner, I've got less material to make this tongue and the groove out of, right? So that has a bit to do with it, as well as it's covering the subfloor-ish. Edges. Okay, I have two different types here between these two different materials. They're different brands. This is that Pergo I put in most of the house. It is a straight edge, and it's designed so that when we put the stuff together, if we hold it up here, that vertical black line you see is not the joint. That's in the printed texture of the board. The actual joint is right there. So you see, it's pretty darn tight. Are you seeing it? That black, not that black. If you're looking at it on a small screen like a tablet or a phone, that is not the joint. The joint is actually right under my finger here. It's a very tight joint. Now we have this other style. This is a bevel joint. In the bevel joint, do you see a little bit of that brown edge wanting to come up on it? Well, it's made and it's cut at an angle, and if I hold the product up this way, you see that dark brown level, or layer if you want, and then you see it's a lighter color on top. Well, when I put them together, now I've got a very prominent line there, very prominent seam. It's still very tight, but you really see that joint. And so a beveled edge vinyl plank is going to show you every single board you put down. It's going to very, very prominently, it's going to draw your eye to the joints where it's put together. In this piece, it's a dark brown. In some pieces, it may be a black color. In other, it might even be a white color, whatever. It's just made to accent where the planks go together to make them show. This style is a square, and I know that black line is a terrible place for it to be, but it's not the joint, so it hides the joints a little bit better. Now I want to talk about the edges. Not every, as far as I can tell, nowadays about every plank I ran into was waterproof. You can't hurt the plank itself if it's all vinyl. You're not really going to hurt it. I mean, your vinyl siding outside gets wet, it doesn't hurt it. You may get mold or something grow if it gets too oxidized, too rough, but you really don't hurt the water. Doesn't hurt the vinyl. It's a type of plastic or polymer. But you may leak through that joint into your subfloor and rot your floor out. So most all vinyl plank I ran into does not require an underlayment. There could be different reasons. I didn't make the plank. I don't know why some require it. It may be very thin. When you look to costing out your estimate of what it would take to put vinyl in your house, find out if you've got to buy underlayment and what that costs a square foot. Because suddenly a very cheap product by the square foot for the plank, if it's got to have an underlayment there, it just shoots your budget all to crap. The thing is, not a bargain at that point. If I got to put in a sealable layer, is it underlayment that's for cushion, or is it underlayment for moisture, or does that underlayment do both, and does your plank need it? Didn't see too much of that, because quite honest, if we do that, we either then have a potentially weak joint that's going to leak water past it. Okay, if it leaks water past it, I don't want that in the kitchen or a bathroom for sure. So if the plank may not rot, but I don't want the water getting through my plank underneath my wooden subfloor to rot that out. So that has a big issue. Now I have this Pergo, the blacker stuff, the darker stuff. It is wet protect. All right, the right kind of waterproof, guaranteed. So it is more toward the high end on the vinyl plank. The joints, I am convinced, are very good, very tight. It's not going to hurt the board, but I need to make sure that my joints don't leak out into my subfloor in the middle of the room. You also have to go around and seal. They tell you how they want you to seal. Somehow you've got to seal up the edges of the floor so that if you have a toilet overflow, that the water doesn't leak and rot out your floor on the floor, like from mopping or whatever, but it may go up underneath your baseboard and get under the floor that way. You don't want that to happen. You might have a leaky sink or dishwasher or a washing machine, something like that. You may have a case where you want it. So the joint itself can be very tight. The material should be waterproof, to not rot, and we don't want it getting around the edges. But not every joint is like that. So pay attention to how your joints go together. Also, as I mentioned, the thickness of that, if that thickness of that plank is real thin, your strength that you're going to have in these pieces, you see, it's a little hard, this gray is hard to pick up on, but you see, they need to go together and fit tightly without breakage, a lot of breakage. Read the comments on the products. So what else do I have on here? Patterns, the patterns. The patterns in the plank and the patterns in the way the planks go down. You can try to do two things. Like on the multiple width, like I told you have to be very careful to stagger so you don't use all of one width and run short and end up with a bunch of extra. So you can kind of randomize that pattern, or you can have a very specific pattern to make sure you don't. On the bottom floor where I put in, if you've already watched that video by the garage, I'm trying to avoid the speed bumps. I don't like those big high transition things at every joint, so I made a choice to have my joints repeat very, very specifically in very, very specific location. And to that edge, I actually used a straight edge to make sure that I didn't slowly drift out as my rows progressed towards the garage. You could also try to randomize that if you can, but remember on your randomization, you have to have a joint on this end of the board. This is cut. So these are fixed length. In both of these brands, they were fixed length. I couldn't change that. They weren't random lengths and they weren't random width. So I end up with this very blocky effect. One way or the other I have to deal with. But the pattern that I do with that also reflects on the plank count, will help make that show up as well. If I have a printed pattern, and I've seen this and I considered it, it looks almost like they took reclaimed barn wood, so it's white at the top where the sun has kept it dry, and it's blackish down here at the bottom where the water's been splashing up. So when I put these two together, I end up with a very whitish edge against the next black looking plank, and it shows up in the variation. Take consideration how your printed pattern and your actual joint pattern are going to go together when you put your floor in. Last thing is the wear layer. All right, this plank is, what do they call it? Solid core lock. I can't remember the name of this. It's a low specific product. It's a loss leader. You don't get very many color choices. You don't get it's not a high plank count. It's a good floor. It locks together good. It feels good under the feet when it's put installed. It's a good floor. It really is. You just don't get much choice in your color and your pattern, your actual printed pattern, and your texture to go with it. And I think it's designed to bring people in and look at the price. Hey, we got vinyl flooring at a lower price, but you can't find exactly what you want, and you go to something else. This is a little more. The Pergo is a little bit more on the high end because this has a 22 mil wear layer. This has a 12 mil wear layer. I have seen some really cheap stuff, that $1.50 a square foot stuff doesn't have a very good wear layer. It may only be 3 or 5, and I would never put anything that low myself because in my mind, let me just explain that to you. It's my opinion, not yours, could be just my opinion. But how the floors show scratches so bad is we have like a clearish layer on top. It may actually have the texture rolled into it by a big roller as they make it. And I'll show you some texture in a little bit. But then below that clear layer is the color layer, the printed layer. And if this top layer, where everything has surface wear, if it takes a cut and it's not very thick, I'll cut through that clear layer. It'll still be a scratch. I'll cut through the clear layer, and then I dig out the color below it. And particularly with this type of beveled edge design, you can see how thick that dark color is below it. Okay? So if I scratch through the wear layer into the printed layer and get below that, I'm going to have a really ugly and prominent scratch. And because it's not wood, I can't stain it. There's nothing really I can do to fix that. It's just going to have an ugly scratch. So some of the super cheap stuff is thin. I think it's subject to more breakage than some of the thicker stuff. And if it doesn't have a good wear layer in it, I believe you have a greater chance of seeing scratches. And in fact, if you look at the product line, there's a very close correlation to having a thick wear layer and scratch resistance and warranty and lifetime and all that kind of stuff to go with it. This stuff is a commercial, carries a commercial warranty to it as well as a residential. It's good for high traffic spaces. If you were going to use a cheaper vinyl floor, plank floor somewhere, I wouldn't put it in a high traffic area if it doesn't have a good wear layer to it. I'm not trying to sell you anything. I don't sell floors, but you don't want to scratch through there. If you have dogs in your house, dogs have nails that stick out all the time. They'll scratch the crap out of a floor. Cats not so much. And if you got kids, that's another issue. But if you don't have kids, you don't have dogs, and you don't have a high traffic area, it can sometimes some of these other cheaper options can be good for you. I mean, they can make good sense and last a long time. It's just they may not take the scratch. So your wear layer goes up. I would probably start at 12 mils and go up from there, 12, 20, anywhere 20 to 22, whatever. Because this gray stuff, the Pergo, is in off the garage stays dirty. I track stuff in from where the equipment's drug in and out of there. And it's major entryway traffic area of the house. I want to have a good wear layer where I put it down. And the laundry room is the same way because we're dragging stuff. Normally you don't come in if you've got dirty clothes, dirty work boots. You don't go all the way through the house to the bedroom, take them off. No, you pull them off somewhere in the mud room or close to the garage or whatever. And it's just you want to keep the scratch protection. So that's the wear layer. Now, last thing, if I'm not running long enough, I want to talk a little bit about the texture to it. The texture on these boards is, I believe, warm rolled in when they make the top plastic layer, because the actual thing that you feel doesn't correlate with the printed layer below. Okay, it's just a big roller that they use to roll the texture in. But you can have a different feel, different texture to it. You can have something that maybe that's a little deeper, a little heavier pressed, and gives you more grip under the feet. I'm not a big fan of the super smooth stuff, but I don't want to feel like I'm walking on a brick or a broom finished concrete floor. So that's something for you to think about too. But it's just printed. I'll put some pictures up as I talk and give you an idea so that you can see it's just kind of a pressed in or molded in shape on top of the colored layer, the printed layer. So I hope that gives you a little bit of an idea worth watching the video for. So that when people start talking to you or you start asking questions, the questions start to sink in and make a little more sense. And maybe just one day, maybe it's raining today and you're watching this video, and it just saves you some time when you go looking at the different brands and different whatever. Just remember, don't always assume that every vinyl plank is waterproof. The joint systems may not be sealed. They may not be a sealed joint. It may require an underlayment to keep the moisture off of it. The wear layer normally is a thickness on that top surface that helps deal with how long it's going to last before dogs are, you don't want to put a brand new floor in with some cheap $1.50 a square foot stuff, move a couch and have a gouge right through your floor that you hate from that second you moved it, or drag a box or something that maybe had a piece of grid on it or something and make it ugly. It happens with life, but you don't want it to dig through that top layer too quick because it'll make the colors show on the bottom. Check your joints, read your reviews for complaints on fragility. The thickness makes it happen. Oh, I got one last surprise. Here it is. Talk about subfloors. Here's a piece. Look at this. This is some high quality stuff, but it is a dark color. It's a relatively dark color. I like to start with, I never want to see a dark ceiling. So I have a light ceiling and I come down, the walls a little bit gray. I need a little contrast at the floor. Well, when I was putting the floor in by the garage, it was sunny and I was cutting outside and breaking outside. That piece, I actually had a piece I let the sunlight hit it and then went to pick it up. When I was cleaning it, it was really super soft and twisted on me real bad. So I'm thinking your color pattern, if you had like a huge big plate glass window like we see sometimes, some of these that are even 2 stories, just 2 stories with a big glass wall almost pointing to the outside. If sunlight comes in there, you might want to make sure your subfloor is nice and smooth and flat at every joint, because that definitely lost integrity when it got warm. I put that over a trailer, the 4-wheeler's trailer, in the sunshine so I could see just how far it would drift. And it is moldable when it's warmish. When the direct sun hits it, it's pretty flexible, pretty soft, and it gets cold, it hardens back up. So maybe if you had a more solar efficient sucking in the heat like the darker gray, if it gets warm and you have a joint, it may actually show a little bit sooner. So always, even if the flooring says it can cover a joint, it's not very sensitive, still check your joint. Still sand any hot, rough spots just to be sure. It's not going to take but a few more minutes to do that. And then you can sleep at night, not having to worry whether the sunshine comes in the back window. And now you can see that 4x8 sheet of Avantech or whatever, or maybe it's something different or whatever. Yeah, do that. It's worth seeing. I'm not knocking the product. I'm just saying that I was surprised because it's a relatively dark color. The sunlight, how soft it got in the sunlight. I haven't seen any kind of problems over any of my floors where I put it in. So just keep that in mind. And I appreciate you watching. If this is actually useful to you and it's not coming across like I'm trying to sell you anything, if you just take it like it's just a worthwhile opinion that you could use, subscribe to the channel, please, and drop a comment. These things work with the algorithms. I'm not super smart, don't know how it all works, but just do that if you will. It'll help me out, because if nobody watches, I might give up and take some of my secrets to the grave. All right. I like vinyl plank. It's certain to get a good vinyl plank, it's not cheap. So just check your products out. Make sure you understand what's warranted. Make sure if your warranty requires some professional install it versus you. Any of these things, find out if you got to seal the edges, that sort of stuff. But I think it's a good option. It has its strengths and weaknesses like everything else does. So it's a floor, and appreciate you watching.